So now that we've covered all the positive attributes of Lacerte, let's look at the downsides. And with that, I want to start with the interface. Now, to say it's outdated is a bit of an understatement. If you look around here, I mean, listen, everybody likes to party like it's 1999, but this software looks exactly like it did, I'm sure, in 1994. So that's a problem. There's no reason why it can't be modernized so that it actually looks like software should look in 2019. A lot of these icons haven't changed in years, and with that said, there is something about consistency from year to year that's important to maintain, because if you're used to using the software in a particular way, having the functionality be completely different from one year to the next isn't attractive. But at the same time, I could tell you that this is something that looks really dated and not really keeping up with the times. I mean, the consistency is good, but the fact that you have something that looks like it's from Windows 3.1 from back in the day, that's not something that's all that attractive. I've seen other software packages that look a lot more modern, a lot more updated, and it just gives you a feel like you're using something that is not an antique. So with that said, I think Intuit can go a long way in modernizing the software to make it a little bit more consistent with the time period that we're using it in. So another thing that drives me crazy about Lacerte are the constant updates. Now, whenever you open the software, you probably see a red band across the top. This happens pretty much all the time. It's even worse during the filing deadlines, meaning April and October for the most part. You'll see these pop up multiple times throughout a particular day. Now, the problem is when you click it, it'll tell you all sorts of alerts and so forth, and it'll tell you that you have to update the software. And when you update it, there's a very good chance that you're going to have to restart your computer. So not only have you opened up a return, and now you are having to pause to do the update, you're also having to turn off your computer, wait for it to restart, wait for everything to reopen, close down all the programs that you had, reopen all the programs that you had, and it really hinders productivity and the workflow. I wish they had streamlined this in a way that it doesn't start popping up and making you do updates right when you're in the heat of battle, so to speak, and trying to get tax returns out the door. Now, there's times around the filing deadlines where there's multiple updates released in a particular day. So as you're working throughout the day, you have to restart in the morning, restart in the afternoon, another 2 restarts in the evening, and it gets to be a bit much. On one hand, I like that they are constantly putting updates out, so that means that there are programmers that are looking out for errors, adjusting any bugs that are in the software and so forth. So I like that they're vigilant, they're on top of it and all that. I just think that they can streamline that process so that the updates are not as frequent, so they don't interrupt the workflow as much. Another downside of Lacerte has to do with multi-state allocation. Now, these are scenarios in which, let's say, you have a pass-through K1 and there are different state amounts that are applicable. Now, the way you allocate that in Lacerte is not the most robust. So basically you'd go in here, you'd enter the federal amount, and then you'd enter all the individual state amounts and so forth. So typically when you're entering information for multiple states, you have a window that pops up like this, and then you have to enter each individual state there. Now, this is not the easiest way to allocate between states. Sometimes in particular tax softwares, there's the ability to have one page where you enter all of the multi-state information and it allocates the income among those states accordingly. In Lacerte, it's more of a one-by-one procedure, whereas you have to enter each state's information separately. So if you're doing multi-state allocation, it's a lot more involved in Lacerte. So if you have clients that have, 10 states, 15 states or so that they need to take into account, that's going to be a lot easier to do with some of the other tax software packages out there than Lacerte, because the functionality there is quite limited when you're dealing with multiple states, and you pretty much have to make the allocation manually to each individual state for the most part. It does offer some functionality in this regard, but in most cases, you're pretty much on your own in allocating multi-state amounts, and you have to be really careful not to make a mistake, whereas other tax packages make it a lot easier. Another negative about the software is the fact that you can't open up multiple instances of the same tax year of Lacerte at once. So if there are 2 individual clients that you want to have up on the screen at the same time in the same tax year, in Lacerte, you simply can't do it. Now, other tax softwares allow you to open up multiple instances of that software, so you'll be able to view different individual returns side by side within the same tax year. Lacerte specifically does not allow that. Now, I've read about some workarounds that may be put in place to allow for that, but for the most part, it's not easy to make that happen. So you really want to take that into account if you are commonly looking at multiple returns in the same tax year of the same type. That's not something that you're going to be able to easily do in Lacerte. All right, now let's talk about another disastrous aspect of Lacerte, and that has to do with the estimated payment calculator. And let's take a look at what I mean there. And again, another pop-up for updates. It's absolutely endless. Let's say that we don't want to be reminded about this. I already mentioned how those pop-ups can get really annoying really fast. But for estimated payments, let's say we want to calculate estimated payments for a client to be made for the next tax year. So right now we have 2018 version of Lacerte. What estimated tax payments are they going to need to make for 2019? So to do that, we have this federal estimated tax worksheet, which sounds great. You can enter the filing status, withholding, and so forth. But here's the downside. Unfortunately, a lot of these fields have that A that I already mentioned has to do with adjustments. So you have to think of it in terms of how is 2019 different from 2018 instead of thinking about 2019 all by itself. So let me give you an example. Let's say in 2018, this client had wages of $100,000, but we're expecting those wages to go up to $150,000. The easiest way to deal with that would be to just enter $150,000 for 2019 as the wages amount, and that should take care of it. But no. Here we have to say, okay, well, what do we expect in 2019? 150. What was it in 2018? 100. What's the difference? 50. And then we have to drop the 50 in there. So having to think of estimated payments by making these adjustments is really annoying. And you have to really do some arithmetic just to determine the adjustment amount to then be entered in the screen. I think if they had a separate column that just said, hey, what's happening in 2019? That would be so much easier than having to deal with this nonsense where they make you think of 2018, then 2019, then what's the difference, and have you do the math on that. I mean, it's such a simple thing to put an additional column in all this white space and allow for that functionality to be a lot simpler. The other downside on this screen and why I feel like it's a disaster is this qualified business income deduction is also manual. So you have to think, not only what are the differences between this year and next year, you also have to calculate what the QBI deduction is going to be in 2019 and then put that adjustment here manually. So again, what's the easiest way to do that? Essentially, in many cases, I have to create a copy of the client file, erase the 2018 amounts, replace it with the 2019 amounts to create a projection of sorts, to then calculate the QBI deduction, what it would be in 2019, take that amount, subtract it from the amount that's of the QBI deduction in 2018 and put that difference in there. I mean, it's a disaster because if I created that copy of the client file and I modeled 2019 using the 2018 return, essentially I've already done the work, which invalidates this page completely. It basically makes it useless because I can use that copied 2018 file to project out what 2019 looks like. That's going to allow me to then calculate the estimated payments, which I can then enter manually up here. So basically, my need to calculate the qualified business income deduction for the taxpayers to which it applies manually and then put it in as an update, the process of doing that invalidates this whole screen altogether. While I know that it does create this fancy schedule here, let me force that worksheet, and then let's put in an adjustment here, and then we can see on the ES worksheet that adjustment is being shown here. So wages this year is 0, the difference is 50, next year is 50, and you'll see each one of those adjustments being done. But unfortunately, it doesn't take qualified business income into account automatically, so you have to do that manually. And there's a whole lot of hoops you need to jump through. You need to be extremely careful with this estimated payments screen to make sure that there are no issues there. So overall, not really thrilled with this whole experience. I think that to get the amounts that you need to complete this accurately, you essentially need to complete a whole nother tax return. So this is a total mess. They need to rethink this basically from the beginning and rework it so that it's actually usable. Another thing that drives me crazy about Lacerte has to do with the rep credit functionality of their website. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So as I mentioned earlier, you can activate demo returns in Lacerte using all 9s for the Social Security number or the EIN number, and that's going to create basically a free return for you to work on for tax projections and so forth. But let's say by accident you activate a return with the actual Social Security number. if you're using the pay per return billing system like I am, they're going to charge you for that return. So you might be paying, $72 just for that little mistake of forgetting to put in the 9s in the social security number field. So you think, well, you could just request a credit, right? Simple. Not so much. To request a credit for the rep fee in that scenario, you basically need to go to their website and you need to use this handy dandy tool where you enter the Lacerte ID, the business name. Let's just enter a bunch of nonsense for now. You're going through this, you're getting the email in there and so forth. You're putting your phone number in. Now you think, okay, that was a good amount of information. Now they just want the type of request. So credit for rep charges, easy enough. Whoa, now we got this thing to deal with. Okay, so now you get the client number, the date processed, you need the module, you got to select which entity it was, okay, individual, and then you got to get the state in there, and then you need the tax year. I mean, come on. Is it necessary to make this process as complicated? I know the mentality is basically, let's make this as tough as possible so that clients, or being the tax preparers, are not going to want to go through it, or they'll mess it up. Basically, they're looking to make this as tough as possible. I don't appreciate it. Number of reps, amount charged per rep. So they should have that information, right? They're charging you, so they should know the amount that was charged, right? And the other thing that happens is sometimes the charge takes a little while to show up, so you may not even know it immediately if you look in their website in the rep section. So this is a disaster. I mean, they should be embarrassed about this whole page. I mean, once you enter all that information, you still need to put in a comments area. You need to fill that in with a description of what happened, which you filled in up here. So it should not be necessary to go through this whole process. This process sucks. They should be ashamed of themselves by having tax preparers need to go through this to get a credit for the rep fee. And this is one aspect that I really dislike about Lacerte. And let's talk about the phone support offered by Lacerte and Intuit, okay? So if you ever feel like you're having trouble with the software and you want to call for technical support, do this instead. Take your hand and slap yourself. That's going to be a better way to go about it than to stay on hold for an hour and a half and then talk to a representative who basically tries to attempt to help you by guessing and checking their own methods. So a lot of times that I've called them, there's been a long time on hold and I haven't really gotten results. So that being the case, I'll try to find the answer online as much as possible or within the software itself. But then you still have a problem. So let's look back in Lacerte and let's look at their help functionality. So let's say, multiple LLC returns CA. Okay, so this search functionality is now looking for a solution for my problem. And let's say here, e-filing, multiple CA, can't read the rest of it, okay. Now, if there's multiple 568s in the return, it gives you the solution here, all good stuff. So it does have a link in here. Let's see if the link works. Okay, so on this computer, it actually does take you to it. On my other computer, that doesn't work at all. So any information that you're seeing inside the window here, you can click any sort of links. It's not going to go anywhere. It just doesn't work. So that's something I think they need to address. But the fact that they have this tool is great, but it's not really a great replacement for phone support. It's one way to find a solution to problems, and I have found a bunch of solutions there, but I would say overall the phone support is unfortunately pretty terrible. Now, let's talk about another aspect of Lacerte that I absolutely hate, and that has to do with the e-organizer or the electronic organizer. Now, I've already talked about the organizer when I talked about the benefits of Lacerte. The fact that it puts together such a comprehensive document is great, but I also touched on the fact that particular organizer is not PDF fillable, so clients can't just type their information inside the spaces using Adobe Reader, for example. Instead, they need to actually edit the PDF by writing on top of whatever information is already there. So it creates a much more difficult process for many clients to enter their information. A lot of them end up having to print out the organizer and fill it out by hand, which in 2019 is a kind of outdated approach. So to get around that, Intuit basically offers an e-organizer or an electronic version of that organizer, which you think is great. Here's the problem. When I tried to activate the e-organizer for purposes of this video so I could demonstrate it to you, I couldn't even get it open. the file has some kind of error that comes up and I couldn't get it to function. Now, unfortunately, that is feedback that I've gotten from multiple clients that have received the file as an email. They try to open it, it doesn't open, it creates a whole bunch of problems. The other issue is that it's not Mac compatible, so if you have a Mac instead of a PC, you could forget about even thinking about the e-organizer. So why do I hate on the e-organizer so much? It sounds like it would solve the problem of not having PDF fillable organizers available for clients. So if you were to ask me what the e-organizer looks like, since it doesn't work, I couldn't even get it to function, it looks a lot like the software itself. So a client will be greeted with a screen that looks very much like this, what the preparer sees. It's not very intuitive. It's not easy for the client. It doesn't have a question and answer system like something like TurboTax. So it's very alien to most clients to look at something like this and have to deal with, the expenses on Schedule C, no explanations really, no help. And a lot of clients are daunted by that because they've never really seen this type of input before. Now, on top of that, it's kind of like putting the layperson behind the controls of a 747. The cockpit just overwhelming in terms of all the options and buttons and so forth. It's very much similar case with the e-organizer. A lot of clients see it and go, wait a minute, aren't I paying you to do this? And they have a pretty good argument there, because if they're being made to enter their information in such a convoluted, difficult to read format, and it's hard for them to know if they're entering the information in the right place, it's not a great experience. So if they're even able to open the e-organizer, many times they're confused by where they should enter information. They don't know if they've entered it correctly. They don't know if they've entered all of the information, and they're not feeling like they are confident in what they've submitted. So overall, terrible client experience. Not only is it a terrible experience for clients, it's also a terrible experience for the preparer, because when you receive the completed e-organizer from the client, it's going to basically prompt you as to whether or not you want to input the information from the e-organizer into the client file. And it's going to basically tell you that, hey, the client inputted all this different information and so forth. Do you want to just slam it into the tax return file? Now, if you click on the button to incorporate all of the information that the client entered, the issue that I've seen many times is that sometimes clients, not knowing the technical side of taxes, might enter a number here, the same number here, the same number there, the same number here, because they don't know that they're doubling or tripling, quadrupling the inputs. Now, trying to track that in the tax return itself is a nightmare, because you may be going through the return and the inputs as a preparer, as a professional, that should be used, and you check those inputs, but it would never even come to your mind that interest would be entered all the way down there in a place where you wouldn't even think to look. Now, I've seen that happen, and when you're reviewing the return, sometimes you find out, oh my God, there's all this stuff that the client has entered in all these different weird places, and now we have to go out and try to find all those different straight inputs and so forth. And it has been a disaster dealing with this. I'm telling you right now, e-organizer sucks, okay? And the solution that we came across at some of the firms that I've worked in is essentially needing to print out all the information in the e-organizer and then input it into the client file by itself. So essentially take everything that the client inputted, print it out to paper or scan it to a PDF or whatnot, and then manually enter all of those items in the actual tax return, which can double or triple the workload that would be required if they just filled out an organizer from the very beginning by hand or with a PDF editor and so forth. So the e-organizer all over is terrible. I do not use it. I do not recommend it. I think that they need to go way back to the drawing board and come out with a web-based e-organizer that takes the information from Lacerte, from the past tax return, and allows the client to see a side-by-side comparison to the current year, so they can enter information, be confident that they're entering it effectively and accurately. So e-organizer is probably one of the worst aspects of Lacerte and something I definitely don't recommend. Now let's talk about the tax planner, okay? So if you are in Lacerte and you want to do some tax planning for your clients, you can access the tax planner as follows. So if you go to Tools, you go to Tax Planner. Now, it says that I'm not currently registered. The reason being is that the Tax Planner is a separate piece of software. But now, again, it suffers from the same appearance problems, being that it looks like it's from 1994. It hasn't been updated since. Aside from that, I'm going to show you an example of what happens when I try to increase the text size of this program on my monitor, okay? And as you can see, this is unacceptable, all right? This is a program that I paid either $250 or $300 for, I don't even remember. And although it does make tax calculations pretty effectively, it does take inputs from Lacerte and input them into a base year for a client, so it saves you the process of needing to enter client information again. All that's great. Why does it look like this? This is not right. I mean, if this was a free software, this wouldn't be acceptable, but this is a paid product and it looks like this with the inability to increase the font size. It's crazy. So on my monitor, being the fact that I don't have the best eyesight, I either need to adjust the resolution to be so huge that I can actually read the numbers. Aside from that, if I want to maintain the aspect ratio of my monitor, which is high definition, I need to have a magnifier tool over the Lacerte Tax Planner so that I could read the thing without driving my brain crazy. So while it's good to have the Tax Planner, there's some benefits to it. I kind of like it. From an appearance perspective, it looks like it's an alpha product. It's not ready for prime time, and they've released it and they've charged money for it. So it kind of blows my mind that we have to deal with this kind of issue on this level of professional software, but it is what it is. So I would say the Lacerte Tax Planner definitely needs some work in order to be ready for prime time. Here's another thing that drives me nuts about Lacerte. Let's say there's a client that has two single-member LLCs, and they're both based in California, which means they need to file the Form 568 for California. It seems simple enough, right? You have one client, two Forms 568. You should be able to do that all in one client file, right? Not exactly. Here's how it works. So let's open up a client here, go to the Schedule C, and we'll have the two LLCs broken out right here. So when you go to electronically file this Form 1040 with those two Schedule C LLCs associated with it, here's how that works. You can't just go ahead and electronically file this one return. That would be way too easy. Instead, you need to create a copy of this client file, meaning now you have two of the same client, and in the first file, you need to delete that second LLC return, and the area you do that is right here. So there's going to be business 1 and there's going to be business 2. So let's just add that for fun right here. So this is the first one. This is the second one. We're in Schedule C. Okay, so this is exactly what it's going to look like. So the first return is going to have both of these. The second return is going to have both of these, right? Because we've made copies, okay? Now we need to go back to the original return, and I'm not making any of this up. This is in the instructions. You need to go back to the original return, delete the second LLC from the original return, because you can only file one single member California LLC per return. It's crazy. So now that we've made a copy, we go back to the original, we delete the second LLC return here in the state LLC area in order to electronically file the first return. Now, how do we file the second Form 568? Well, you exit this original file, you go to the new copy that you created, and there you have to delete business number 1. Then you'd be able to file that Form 568. Now, notice what happened. You had to activate a whole new tax return. So just to file that additional state form, you need to incur yet another rep fee for that second return. So you're essentially paying for 2 tax returns just for the privilege of filing the Form 568 for California, okay? That is ridiculous, all right? So you are taking the original return, just to summarize, you're creating a copy. In the original return, you're deleting business number 2. In the copy, you're deleting business number 1. And that is the only way that you're going to be able to electronically file a Form 1040 with 2 Schedule Cs associated with it, being that they're each filing Form 568. Now, the workaround to this is to have those single member LLCs handled in the partnership module, but then you have single member LLCs that are in the partnership module. They're separate from the 1040 completely. That can get very confusing in and of itself. So the fact that you have to make copies of Form 1040 clients in order to file multiple state LLC returns and have to incur additional rep fees is a definite downside of Lacerte. So that concludes the pros and cons of the Lacerte tax software as I see it. Now, if you're asking me for an overall assessment, given the advantages and given the disadvantages, I still think Lacerte is beneficial on a net basis. I like that the pros outweigh the cons. There's certainly some significant downsides, but I would say on a whole, I like the software. I use it for my practice. I think there's definitely some advantages that drive it way beyond a lot of other tax packages out there. Now, I will say that from an ease of use perspective, Lacerte definitely has some advantages. I've used other systems, pro system effects, that are almost impossible to navigate, and the learning curve is extremely steep, whereas I've had some very new tax preparers navigate their way through Lacerte and learn their way around the software pretty quickly. So the learning curve is definitely reduced, so that's a benefit. Overall, the fact that when I file a return with Lacerte, I feel secure, I feel that I have peace of mind, and so forth, that it helps you dot some of the I's and cross some of the T's that are associated with tax preparation. So that's a definite plus. And overall, I find no issue with the cost. Now, again, that's controversial. Some firms out there are paying $20,000 a year for Lacerte. So, it really depends on your individual experience. But me being a smaller firm and the fact that I'm going on a pay per return basis, I'm able to justify the cost, and I don't have any issues with it. So if this video was helpful for you, drop a like down below, drop a comment, let me know what you thought. Let me know if you learned something about Lacerte that you didn't know before. And feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you're notified of future videos as soon as they're available. With that said, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching. Alright, so just as I was going to go to edit and upload this video, I received this from Intuit, which outlines the changes that they're going to make to the 2019 Lacerte product. Now, it just so happens that they've addressed two of the complaints that I had about the software that I've laid out throughout this video. So I thought it would be important, because I always want to deliver the latest and greatest information to you guys, to make sure that I provide an update regarding what to expect for 2019 according to Intuit. So what they're saying here is that they did address the sorting issue that I mentioned. So the way it is set up now is that the Clients tab allows you to sort by only the leftmost column, which means all the other columns are not sortable. What you'd have to do is drag any other column to the leftmost position, and then you could sort by whatever information is in that leftmost column. So what they're saying here is that they've addressed that issue to where you can click any of the column headings, no matter where they are on the screen, and the information will be sorted by whatever's in that particular column. So that's a welcome change to see. I'm glad that they did that. The other thing that I mentioned was the fact that if you have one 1040 client that has multiple California LLCs, for example, let's say they have 3 LLCs, you would have to create multiple copies of that 1040 file in Lacerte and possibly get charged multiple rep fees if you're using it on a per rep basis. So it looks like they're addressing that. They're saying that you can file multiple instances of LLC returns and entity returns within one 1040 filing. So it looks like they've addressed that issue. Hopefully they implement it in a way that makes sense, that's easy to use, that's not confusing or burdensome. And if they do, then essentially they're taking two of the complaints that I had about the software right off the list. So obviously there's other issues that they have yet to address, but it's good to see that they are listening and that they are making changes to the software with each release. And it looks like they're addressing some of the issues that have been sticking points for users for quite some time. So hopefully they'll keep this up. I did want to give you an update on this, and hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for watching.